This speed demo, I'm going to quickly create a Nest.js server on top of Fastify. We're going to be exporting a GraphQL authenticated API, and we're going to be hosting everything on our Mongo local DB. I'm going to be using Brew install for that. So I'm going to use the Nest.js framework. Everything comes included. It's going to be including the GraphQL decorators that we need, as well as the Mongoose. So we're going to just create a single base. This is going to be code first for the schemas, so it's going to be running on top of the Fastify. I'm going to be using local MongoDB Brew. We're going to be using Passport for authentication. We're going to be using this strategy, the JWT. And quick note for Fastify, we're going to have to be updating our Apollo server Fastify to version alpha 3.0 as of today. Today is March 25th, so be on the heads out for that. And at the end, we're going to have this. So this is just a quick playground, so I could just show you guys. We're going to have, we open up our schemas. We have different types of, we have an input type for CreateUser. We have mutations. We have our CreateUser, login, UpdateUser, and UpdatePass. We're going to be using Nest.js partial and omit types for those. Remove users, and then we have our basic queries such as FindOne, FindOne, and our CurrentUser. We're going to be creating a decorator that fetches our current user as the person's logged in. So just if we come over here and I click on login under Steve and I click on login, I'm going to get this token. So if we open up here, let's just paste in this. And now with that code, if we were going to use anything to, let's say, current user, we can fetch our current user. All right, let's get started. So let's just run a fresh Nest new project, and after it finishes installing, let's get started. Let's just go inside it and let's just use E. So we can start going any direction, but one thing I like to do is start going down the package JSON. So from here I can see. So we come in here, one thing we're going to start doing is we don't need Express. So I'm going to delete the typings of that dependencies and that itself. Okay, and so right here is where I can start installing all our additional modules. So let me see, everything's installed. Perfect. I'm going to use this prettier package. I'm going to use, now this will save on command. Okay, and so what I want to add is some dependencies that we're going to use. So we're going to use GraphQL, Mongoose, Passport, and then some Passport with JSON web tokens, and bcrypt, and our Fastify engine. Okay, so right here, so these are what we're going to need. We're going to need Nest and GraphQL, our Nest, Mongoose, and Mongoose standalone library. So the Nest JWT token module, and then, all right, I forgot to add here, but make sure you add Passport. So we have Nest.js Passport and passport-jwt, but also add Passport. And then our Fastify engine and bcrypt. So we can just use a yarn add. After that, we're going to have to install the dependency of Apollo server. And because we're using Fastify, we're going to have to use the Apollo server alpha version 3. That's actually well documented on their own. Okay, and so while this is going, I'm just gonna start renaming this. Okay, I'm just gonna rename this to resolver. Okay, and then I can remove from my source my app.controller.spec, because we don't want that, because that's a resolver. Okay, so this is good. Now let me hide my node modules. Okay, we need our GraphQL, JWT, Mongoose, Passport, our Fastify, bcrypt, our standalones, and then let's just add our yarn dependency, and this is gonna be Apollo server Fastify, and this is gonna be at 3.0.0 -alpha 3. And that's for the playground. So we want to use alpha version 3. Let this load. Okay, now let's go into our modules And let's just do some refactoring. Okay, and then our @resolver, since this was previously a controller, we can remove these, and this is gonna be a resolver, and we're gonna bring this from the GraphQL query. Oh, and this is gonna return of type string. And then we have our modules, imports. So from imports is where we're gonna need our Mongoose module and our GraphQL module that we're bringing in from Nest.JS library. For root, this is gonna take an object, and this is just gonna take a string 017. Okay, I'm gonna call this off nest, and then here is gonna take some properties. So we're gonna put the auto schema to true because it's gonna be auto generated. We're going to set our playground to true, and we want to set our debugging to false. Okay, and let me see what else. Let's go to our main right here, and we're gonna have to import. So we're gonna import our @Nest.fastify. And inside here it has 2 exporting modules. We're gonna use both of them. And then if we're right here, create is we're gonna have to specify, and then we're gonna pass in our new Nest.fastify adapter inside here, inside our create. So let's first specify that this is gonna be a Nest fast application, and then this is gonna be of app module, and then this is gonna be a new fastify adapter. And if we do a save it, it will auto compress it. Okay, and GraphQL. Now we should just have one query that we can run, which is get hello. Okay, so one query coming back. Okay, so now this is working. So now next thing we want to do is create the authentication and our connection to database. So for this guy, this is pretty much done. So let's go over here. Our @resolver, we're going to create a user resolver, and then our main engine is up and running. Okay. Now, one thing I'm going to do is create the rest of our directories. And so I'm going to create a module for user. Okay, so from here, I'm just going to go Nest generate module. I'm going to call this user. And then I'm going to do Nest generate service user, Nest generate R of user. And then I'm also going to need a guard. So from here, I'm going to go to my CD user directory. And here's where I need to basically inside here do Nest generate guard. I'm going to put this as a user guard. Okay, and after that, we're going to create our user.entity.ts, and then our also JWT Strategy.ts, and then our UserInputs DTO.ts. And I think that is it. And we also need a decorator. Yeah, so I'm gonna say user decorator.ts. Now those should all create all these files inside here. Perfect. Let's get started working on our entity. So our user model. So like I mentioned, the great thing about Nest.js is that we can bring in it has a Mongoose npm package, and also has a GraphQL package, and that you can use its own decorators to just create a single class that you specify your Mongo scheme and then your GraphQL scheme, and then you create your DTOs aside from that, which is really useful because then we can create partial types and mix it with omit types, so we can just have a update user minus the password property. Okay, so let's get started. So we're gonna need from Mongoose, we're gonna need Nest Mongoose, we're gonna need prop, and then we're gonna need schema to create our schema, and then our schema factory. And then after that, we're gonna need our Nest GraphQL packages, and that's gonna be as before. We're gonna need our field, and then our object type, and then a register enum type, and that's gonna be for the roles because we're gonna choose between basic and advanced roles. Okay, and then we're gonna need from Mongoose itself, what we're gonna need is the document and types. Okay. So let's start building our object type and schema. So we're gonna say at object type and at schema type. So we're now, these are two decorators coming from each respective library, and we're gonna say export class. We're gonna call this user, and while I'm here, next thing I want to do is export type, and we're gonna call this user document, and this is gonna be of type user and document. Okay, and we need to do one more, and this is going to be the export of user scheme that we're going to bring into our user module. So export const user schema, and this is going to come from the schema factory that we're importing, which has a method called create for class, and all we have to pass in is our user class. Okay, and now from that we can start defining our properties. So like every good one, we're always going to have an ID, and that ID is going to be an of type object ID, but we're going to return it as a string, and then we're going to just call it underscore ID, and this is going to be of types, and again this is going to be a specific object ID since it's going to be unique. Okay, and then I'm just going to copy some of this, and then we'll create a prop. And then this is gonna, I can leave this here. This is gonna be first name, and this is just gonna be a string. So we can just duplicate some of this. Okay, so from here I want to change this to last name. This I want to change it to password, and this I want to change it to email. And what else do we have? What else do we need? Oh, and then our roles. Okay, and then we also want to do a created at. And this is going to be a type string. And so for our roles that we, like I said, we're going to need an enum type. So let's just do a base of field, and this type that we're going to return back is going to be of roles, and then we're going to set the default value to roles dot admin, and let's leave this to nullable, so because this could be true, this could be empty on. And okay, so let me put this to roles, and there's gonna be also a type of, it's gonna be an optional. Okay, so right now we're gonna have to create our enum type. So we're gonna use this function that we're importing, register enum type, and we're also gonna have to create. So we're gonna say enum, and we're gonna call this roles, and so this is gonna be a string enum. So we're gonna call admin is equal to admin, and then our basic is equal to basic. Cool. And then from here is we're gonna say we want to get our roles, and then we're just gonna call it, we're gonna say specify. So our name is gonna be yeah, roles, and then we can add a description. Roles for admin, creating projects and users. Okay, so now all this should be connecting, and we have our data set. So perfect. So we're using from the Mongoose Nest.JS library and from the Nest.js GraphQL, we're using a single type to work on this. Okay, and the next thing we're gonna move on is our user module. Okay, and just like the app module, we're gonna import GraphQL and the Mongoose module, but we're gonna change it up, because here's where we have to specify to Mongoose, hey, create a class in our object type of this specific schema of this data type, and then the GraphQL is what's going to start creating our mutations and queries. So let's go create an imports array, and again we're going to use our GraphQL module, And this is going to be, I think, for, no, actually, what am I saying? We're not going to need a GraphQL module. We are going to need here is our Mongoose module and our JWT strategy that we still need to create. Okay, so let's just go into Mongoose module.forFeature, and let's add our array. And then inside this array, it's going to be a name, and this is going to be of our user that we created. So we're just going to bring in this entity, and we're going to bring in the name. And the schema that we want to supply it with is going to be with the user schema that we also created, that we're also going to import. And let's add our trading comma, and then that's all we can do for now. Okay, so let's go to our JWT strategy. And for our strategy, what we're going to need is our passport-jwt. And then from here, we're going to need extract JWT and strategy. Okay, and then from our Nest passport, we're going to need passport strategy. And then finally, from the Nest comment, we're going to need injectable. Comment, and we're going to need injectable. Perfect. So let's create our decorator of injectable. And we're going to call this class export class. This is going to be our JWT strategy that's going to extend our passport strategy. And we're going to place in our strategy from our passport-jwt. So let's create our class. And so this is going to have a super constructor. And what we're going to pass in these objects is, it's going to be these properties that's going to start creating this on every request and every response. So we're going to use JWT from request. And then from here is where we're going to use that extract JWT, and we're going to use our from auth header as bearer token. So that's going to get our bearer token. And then one is ignore expiration. And then we're going to say false. And then our final one is going to be our secret or key. And here I'm just going to say, you know, really fucking difficult. Okay. And so we have that for our J2 object, and then what we're going to need is we're going to validate it because it's going to look for this, and we're going to create a payload which we're going to define later. But for now, let me just create this. We're going to deconstruct from our payload. We're going to grab our ID and our email because that's what we're going to store in every payload from our JSON web token. So we're going to get this from our payload. And then what we're going to return is just ID and email and an object. I think this is telling me that, nope. I want to really save this to the dictionary. Okay, and have our strategy, and then we're going to create our current user decorator. So this is going to be used to fetch the current user's ID for validation. And we're going to get this from our Nest.JS common, and we're going to use create param decorator, and then execution context is what's going to carry that. And then from our GraphQL, we're going to need our Nest GraphQL library, and then we're going to use our GqlExeCtx context. Great. So let's create our class, export const current user is going to be a create param decorator, and so this is going to be of type data, and that data is going to be currently unknown, and then our context is going to be of execution context. Okay, and that is it. So then we can create our logic, and so from here we want to deconstruct. We're going to deconstruct our ID and our email from our GqlExeCtx execution context. So let's grab our underscore ID and our email, and that's going to come from our GqL execution, because we're going to from there create context. And we're going to create a context. And then from there, we're going to use the get context method, and we're just going to get our request user. Okay, and then from there is where we can return again our underscore ID and our email and an object. Okay, so once that's running, let me see, we have our user decorator, our entity, and then we can just start working on our guard. Our guard, we're not going to really use any of this. It's just going to be another GqL off guard. Okay, so from here, I'm going to import again from Nest common. I'm going to bring in my injectable that we need in our execution context. And then again from passport Nest.js, we're going to nest passport, and we're going to bring in our Auth guard. And then from GraphQL, Nest GraphQL, we're going to bring in our GqL execution context again. So we're going to create an injectable, and then from there, we're going to again export class, and we're going to call this GqL off guard camel case. And then we're going to extend this one to be the off guard of type, and then we're going to pass in the strategy that we're going to use, which is JWT. Okay, and so from here, we're going to use a get request function, and this is going to be of execution context. And then from this method is where we're going to get our context. So we're going to create a constant called CTX abbreviation, and this is going to be our same GqL execution context that we're going to create our context from. And then from here is where we're just going to return our CTX get context, and we're going to return our user. Okay, and then we have our user module that I think we already changed, and then our user resolver. So this two-part, actually, let me work on the user inputs DTO before I move on the resolver and the service, because the resolver and service, they're going to be really hand in hand. So let's just create our user inputs for our create and update user inputs. So I'm going to need some things that I'm just going to copy from our GraphQL here. Close our module. User inputs DTO. Okay, so again, let me close my resolver and my service for now, because we'll come back to that. And I just copied my Nest imports. Don't really need this, don't really need this, don't really need this. Okay, so let's bring in our imports that we're going to need. And from here, we're going to create an input type. Input type. And then this is going to be our export class. And we're going to call this CreateUserInput. Now, just a fun fact, Nest already does a lot of this heavy lifting for us if you use the Nest generate resource. But it also creates a lot more stuff that we need to do. But for this example, I just want to create it very short. So again, we're going to create a field, and so we're always going to need our first name, a string, and let me just last name, and then our email, well, password, and then let me put email right after password. Doesn't really matter, because in our GraphQL query is all we're going to choose what to replace back. And then, okay, so we have string email, and then let's do our created at. So this is going to be our created at, and this is going to be a string, but I want to initialize it here now. So I want to call it new date, and we're just going to use toIsoString. Okay. So this is our input for So this is going to create an input type. So all these by default are going to be required. And then what we're going to do is create a partial and omit type. So when we update the user, the only thing that the user can update would be first name, last name, email, and that's it. Password and created at, we're going to omit it from there. So we're going to choose omit type and then partial type. Partial type. Okay, and also from here we could say input type, and then we're going to export class, and this is update user input extends. And so here this is going to be a first partial type, because this is going to be able to take in the base, and then we're going to use an omit type to remove access from our create user input. We want to remove access to our password created at, and then we want to pass these as a const, so that makes it unchangeable. And yeah, okay, so right there we have our update and create user inputs. What else are we missing? Now for the user resolver and service, so I'm just going to put these side by side because I'm going to use IntelliJ to fill out some of this. So I'm going to go to my resolver, and so yeah, let's get started with the resolver, and then resolver will just auto create my user methods from here because IntelliJ will handle that part. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna need from resolver, this is gonna bring back a type user. So I need my user entity. It's gonna say user entity, and then we're gonna need a constructor for this. So we're gonna export class user resolver, and so this is gonna use a constructor, and this is gonna be a private read only because we only want to use our user service. So this is going to be a user service, and then let me close this constructor. So let's create our first mutation for create login, and then we'll create a query for FindOne so we can make sure that it's all working. Okay, so we're going to need a mutation, and this is going to bring back a user. Okay, and we're gonna call this create user. Okay, and then we're gonna be using arguments, and so this is gonna be our create user input type, and so then we want to place it right here, and then here's we want to specify create user input, and I think that is the only thing that we need from them. So after that, is here we place our logic, and since it's a asynchronous function, we're gonna do a try catch, and then what we want to do is return await this dot us, and then this is gonna say our create user, or this is gonna be just use this dot create user, and then here's we're gonna pass in our create user input. Now this function does not exist, but if we go here, let me see. Okay, perfect. So all I want to do is add import statement, and I want to use my service. Now I should have the option to create this, create method. Perfect. So this is what I want to do. I just want to create my resolvers and then just auto fill out to my user service, and then my services will handle my Mongoose connections. Okay, so we have our create user. Let's do one more for login. So login is pretty much gonna have some of the same stuff. Mutation, and this is gonna be of type string because for our login we want to bring back our token. Okay, and then for our arguments, okay, for our arguments, what we want is of let me see if I can call this login. Okay, and we're just gonna need login, email, and password. Email, This is of type string, and then we're just gonna duplicate that one more, and let's just password. Okay, and then again we're gonna do a try catch, and then this is gonna return await this.us.login, and then we're gonna pass in the email and the password. So let's come over here and let's create a create method login. So create a password with parameters of password and email. Great, great, great. Now let's move on to our query for our find all. So this is going to be of type query. And then from here, we want to return is an array of users. So this is going to return user array because that's how we define it here. And now here's where we want to create, before we can find all, actually. I think, yeah, whereas we're going to use our GQL off guard. Okay, so from here, what we're going to do is we're going to use a guard from Nest.js, and then we're going to specify with the GQL off guard. So use guard, there's a use guard. Okay, use guards, and then we want to specify the GQL, and then we're going to do a import it. And so we're going to do an async find all users, and this is going to be a function, no parameters, and then we're just going to return await this.userService.find all. This doesn't exist. Let's put this in a try catch. Okay, and then lastly, we're just gonna create that. Okay, and I think that is good for now. Everything is running great. Okay, so for our service, what we're gonna have to first do is create a connection to our Mongo, like I mentioned earlier, and some data from our user entity. So let's get started with our Mongoose. So we're going to import from Nest Mongoose. We're going to use our inject model. This is what you're going to use to get access to the user model. So the user repo, you can think of this. And then what we're also going to need is from Mongoose, again, the types and the model and types that we used earlier. And then we're going to need our user document and our user. So import from user entity. And we're going to bring our user and our user document. And we also need to bring then our inputs DTO. So we have create input and we have update inputs. And then we also need our JWT service. So from Nest JWT, we're gonna bring in our JWT service, and then we're gonna need import everything as bcrypt. So import just bcrypt. I think I have bcrypt, and then from here we want to import everything as bcrypt. And from here, I also want to import just a GraphQL error, just because I like it a little bit more. It's a little bit more informative than the default. So I want GraphQL error. Okay, that is everything that we need to bring into here. Okay, so let's get started with our create user. So since this is going to be asynchronous, let's actually, let me just do all of these because these are going to be try catch. Okay, great. And we also need a constructor. And for our constructor here is where we're going to create a private JWT service. And this is going to be a JWT service And then we're also going to need our inject model that I said we're going to create. And so this is going to be of type user.name is how we're specifying it. It's going to be a private variable that we're going to call it user model uppercase. And then this is going to be of type model. And this is where we specify our user document. Okay. Okay, so right now we created our injection to our Mongo database, which is right here. Well, one of the connections, because we originally did it in the user module, and prior to that in the app module. So as you can see how data, I guess, transcends down. So now let's work on our create user. So our create user is going to be taking in this input, and what we can do is just let's do a const. Let's first validate to make sure that this user does not exist, because if it does exist, we're just going to throw a new GraphQL error that says, like, nah bro, you already exist. Else we're going to just hash the new password with the bcrypt, and then we're just going to save that user into our user model. So let's say is user, and there's going to be an await, and there's going to be this dot user model dot FindOne FindOne by ID. There should be find by ID. Okay, and so from here we want to pass in, FindOne, sorry guys. And so from here we're going to pass in the parameter of email. We want to look for one of this email, and so from here we're just going to see if this person's email that they already created is, if it's true, then we're just going to throw an error. So then we say if is user is true, because if it was false, then it was empty. Then we could just go ahead and just create our new user. So if this is true, then we just want to throw a new GraphQL error, and we're just going to say, nah bro, you already exist. Oh, spell that wrong. Throw new GraphQL error. Okay, and then else is where we're just gonna use so we're gonna do our create user input. This has a password, and we're gonna use await bcrypt, and then the bcrypt has a hash method that we're gonna use to just hash our create user input dash password. The salt length that we're going to use is 10. So this is asynchronous, because right after that we could just do a .then, and then we would just want to return our updated password. And then finally we could just return our await new this dot user model, and then from here we're just gonna push in our create user input that has now our hash password, and then just our saving method. Okay, let me see, what errors do we have here? Oh, okay. Okay, so I should have any errors here. No errors, perfect. And okay, so let's move into our login, and our login is just going to validate it. So it's just going to check if user email and password is the same one that we have on database, then pass in this query. Then you can give them a token. Else say, nah bro, you don't exist. Okay, so let's just remove this unnecessary stuff that we need. We don't need specifications for now. Okay, and then from here, what I want to do is I'm going to try finding a new user like this. So I'm going to basically go to is user, find one by email that we're using, and then if this is true, it's also where I want to compare with the bcrypt function. Okay, so let's do this. So create a const and we're going to call this user again, and this is going to be an await, and this dot user model dot find one, and then we're going to pass in the email. So this is going to bring in a user or not. So then we're going to return if res and await bcrypt. So let me wrap these, and then we're going to compare bcrypt.compare and then from here is we're going to pass in our password that the user is trying to log in, and then we're going to compare that with the actual user.password. Okay, and so that's going to say yes or no. And so, okay, so this is going to bring a boolean, and if that boolean is true, what we want to do is return a token. Else is where we can return a new GraphQL error, and we say, nah, homie, wrong password email. Okay, and let me add to my dictionary, because homie triggered. Okay, and then our res cannot find, I'm sorry, this has to be user. So if our user is true, and then we want to compare if this is also true, then to bring back our token. Else we're going to throw in a new GraphQL error. And let's create our helper function for our, we don't need to, so let's just actually just throw a token. Okay, and we're going to return this .jwt service. This is going to have a sign in async, and then what we want to pass in is our email that we're using right there, and our user for underscore ID is we're going to pass in our user dot underscore ID. Okay. All right, so let's now go into our find query all. So this is going to try wait, and for our find all, it's just going to return this user model, and it's going to say find, and then we want to execute it. Okay, so those are some simple that we have needed. Okay, so we're not using this yet. So let's check out our GraphQL server. So we update this now. Now we go to queries. Let's go to a schema. We'll have an input of CreateUser. We have a mutation for CreateUser login, and then we have a find all, and these are our types. Okay, so let's create a query. Let's create for login called find all. So for our create, we're going to create a user which takes in this input, and let's just start. I'm going to call this f name. Okay, and then we want to bring back from there, we want to get our ID, our first name, we also want to get our email, and then we want to make sure our password is hashed. And then we also want to get our created at and our roles to make sure that all this is being filled out on instance. So let's go to our, okay, so now we have our ID, our F name, email, password. And if I have this tool here called Robo3D, 3T, I think, Robo3T. And this is basically a GUI for my MongoDB, is where we specify the name. So here it's called Auth Nest. So we have this, and if we go to collections, we have a DB that we just created. So this is our instance of our user that we just created. So we have an email, our password is hashed, and then we have our created ISO type string. All right, now let's work on our login. Let's check out our login, because now our login should return a token. Okay, and let me see. So this is going to be a login input, and this is going to be an email. So email is going to be, what did I put right here? Test at test. password should be password. And if everything serves me right here, now if we play our login, we should get our token key. And let's just add one more S to make sure it's working. Yep, now homie, wrong password. Okay, let me put an S here. Try that again. Now homie, wrong password. Cool. And now for our find all query. So again, we have a query here called find all users. And from all our users, we want to bring an ID and email and password. Now, one thing's going to happen is we're going to get a unauthorized. So we go here and we go our find all unauthorized. What we need to do is from our login, we need to grab this key, this token. And then if you're using Postman or XYZ, you always need to insert headers. And GraphQL Playground and the Apollo Playground, it's like this. You go to HTTP headers, you create a property, key value pair of authorization, and then we're just gonna paste this here. So this token oh no, god damn it. So I think let me just paste this again. All right, so this token right here holds our data of our ID and email. So we try to find it's gonna validate everything, and then we see all the users that we want here. Great. So let's create another one, and just call this Tony Stank, and let's say at Ironman at avenge.io. Okay, same password, and let's just create this user, and now let's call Steve Rogers. And let's say Captain America, same password. Okay, and now we see find all. We have our users of Captain America and the test that we created. So this is coming out great. Now let's finish our other queries that we need. So right here, what we're missing is our update password and update user. Because update password is going to just be an omit type of password, and this is going to be a variable. We're not going to need an input class for a password, just for an update user. So okay, so let's do update user and update password, and I'm just gonna pretty much copy this for user. Okay, so I'm gonna come here. And let's just duplicate this twice. So now this is going to be called update user input. And then there's going to be update user password. Update user password. One final thing before we go on is for update user password and input, we need to add the current user decorator. I forgot about it. I'll add it later. Okay. So for update user input, the only input that we can change is our current. So what we're gonna need is our current user and then the input that we have. So let me just, so this is gonna be update. This is gonna be user. Where's update user input? Update user input, okay. And I'm gonna pass this lowercase. So I can grab here. So there's gonna be of type update user input, and we're gonna pass this. And this is not gonna be a create. Let me bring this in. What do you mean? Update user input. Here's where you want to get it from. Okay. And then for our arguments, what we want to do is for our update user input, we're going to need an ID. And so that ID is going to come from our current user. So current user, decorator, yep. And decorator, and we're going to return a variable of user And then for the arguments is where we're going to use our update user input. And then for our try await, we want to say this.user service. And here's where we're going to say update user. Okay. Now let me create this because it's going to tell me create method update user. Great. And then this is update user password. And for this is just going to say what we first want to do is confirm the current password. And so this is going to be of type string. And then we want to update the new password. So new pass. Okay, and then again, we're going to get the current user ID from here. Okay, and then this is going to say update password. And so from here is we're going to pass in our current password. And then our new pass and our ID. Our user._ID. And so from here, we're just going to create a new method, which is going to take our current password and our user ID. Should have gone in there. Okay. And actually, I don't need these because I'm not going to be deconstructing an object. So yeah, let me just put here the user._ID, and then we're going to pass in the current user, current password, and then the new password. Perfect, no errors. Let me check my code. This is running. Perfect. All right, so we have our update user password. And now what else are we missing? So we have update user, and then let's do our FindOne by ID. And then remove user and get the current user. Okay, so let's go over here and let's do one that's called @query, and this is going to be returning back a string, and this is going to be called with a use guard, and then we want to use the GqL off guard that we created. Sync FindOne, and this is going to take an argument of ID underscore ID, which is going to be underscore ID, and it's going to be of type this type of underscore ID. Okay, so we have arguments. And then this is where you have to specify the type, and it's going to be a function. So this is going to return a string, and then from here we can specify our ID variable, and it's going to be of types .object ID. This would be an object ID here. Perfect. And this should be coming from Mongoose. Add import statement from our Mongoose. Great, great, great. This should have no problem at all. And okay, now let's add our logic. And so for our FindOne, it's gonna be our this.userService.FindOne. So return this. Or return await this.userService.FindOne, and we're going to pass in the ID here. So then we're going to create our method of FindOne. Okay, and then we need our remove user mutation. So mutation, and this is going to return, let's gonna say this is going to return the user that we deleted. You can bring a confirmation up to your, It's entirely up to your project. And so this is going to be an asynchronous function, remove user, and it's going to basically be the same arguments of ID. Okay, and so we're going to say remove user at args, and we're going to say strings underscore ID. And so with this return ID is going to be return ID of a string, and then we can work on our logic, which is going to be a try catch return await this user service, and this is remove, and then we're going to pass in the underscore ID. Let me create my remove method. Now this should be perfect. All right, and for fun, when then our bonus is gonna be our current user. So we're gonna say our query, and then from there we're gonna bring in our current user that is signed in, and we're also gonna use our useGuard, and this is gonna be a sync current user. And so this is going to take a current user decorator that we used, which brings a user type. Okay. And what we want to do is just return that, really. And so just try another try catch. And we'll return await this user service dot find one, and we're going to pass in our user dot underscore ID. Okay, and so we have our resolver done, and let me just use one of my tools here, structure. Okay, and so if you look at our resolver, we created our resolver, we created our constructor, whereas there's where we inject our dependency injection for our services. And then we created a method CreateUser, a login user, a FindOne, find all, input user input, update user input, update user password, and then our FindOne, our remove user, and our current user. And now we're gonna move on to our user service to finish out our remaining methods. Okay, so let's come over here. Okay, so for our update, I think we have an update password. Did I do an update anything? Okay, so for update user, we're gonna be using a couple of same logic just to verify. Okay, so for our, let's get started on update user. Okay, and let me go to my update user. So if I just click on this, it will take me to my resolver in line 51, 53. Okay, and where am I using this? I'm not yet update user. Yeah, okay, so from here I want to pass in our user dot underscore ID. So that's how we're going to specify the user that we want to update. And so now this is going to be taking an ID with the user input. And so let's do again this, where we're just going to do a try catch, and we could pass whichever ones we have here. So our update user, what we want to do is await, return await, and we want to say this dot user model. Sorry about that. And there's a function called find by ID and update. So we're going to say find by ID and update. So the arguments that this is going to accept, the first one that we're going to pass in is our ID, and then followed by our user input, and finally we're just going to have to execute it. So let's do our it's going to be passing in our underscore ID, and then it's going to be our update user input that we're bringing in. Have to create a new object, and we're going to say a new property new. We're going to say this to true. So once we have that, we can just go here, and then we're just going to execute it. Okay, so that's our update user. So it's going to be finding our user by ID, and then it's going to update with just first name, or I think you can only change email, first name, or last name. No password or created at. And then our password is going to be pretty much the update password. So we're going to confirm our ID is by type ID, and then we're going to confirm the password. Okay, so let's do a const of user, and this is going to say await this dot user model dot find one by ID, and then we're just going to pass in ID underscore ID. So that's going to return our user, and then we just want to do is compare. So if our user, well, await, because this is going to be a bcrypt asynchronous function. So bcrypt.compare, and then again we want to compare our current password with our user.password. And so if this is true, what we do want to do then is our user.password, we want to now hash it. So wait bcrypt.hash, and there's where we want to pass in our new password. And again, we're going to give it a salt length of 10. So now our user is updated with the new password, and then we just got to return it. So return await new this dot user model, and we're going to pass in our user that we just created, and finally we're just going to save. Okay, we're almost done. So we have update user, update password, and let's finish our FindOne and remove. So if remove and FindOne are pretty much identical. All we have to do is go here, and this is going to be await this dot user model, and then this is going to say find one by ID, and then it's going to say just find one, and then find one by ID and remove. So really it's just respective one. So let's just find one, and we're just going to say find by, there should be a find by ID, and then we're just going to pass in our underscore ID, and that is it for our find one. And for our remove, we're going to say find by ID and remove. Find by ID and remove. And I think that is it for our authenticated GraphQL server. Throw option called locally. Oh yeah, I know that. So let's come back over here, and if we refresh our page, so we still have our current login. So we have, let's see all our users. So we run this, we have our test at test, Iron Man Avengers, Captain America, and so let's see what new queries and mutations we added. So we have now our create user input, and we also have our update user input, and then we have our queries. Now we have find one in our current user, and we have our mutations. We have update user input, update user password, and remove user. Okay, so let's get started testing them out. So I'm gonna do first, I'm gonna delete my user just to test the delete user. So remove user, and then here is remove user. It's gonna take an ID, and this ID is gonna be this guy right here, and this should be returning my ID, and I just want first name. So if I run this now, it's deleted, and if I do my find all, I'm only gonna get 2. Now, one thing I want to do is just change my bcrypt, my auth token right here, as you can see, because this was originally created for our login that we created here. So I'm just going to say CA, and then I'm going to say avg.io, and log in under as Captain America. So let's grab our token and just update it. Okay, and now there's one mutation I want to do now. I'm just gonna comment some of these out. I don't need my create mutation. And so let's do a mutation of, let's see what we have here. Let's get current user. Okay, so let's test that out. Let's do create current user, and this is gonna be current user. And what we're going to return is the ID, the first name, and the email. Okay. So now if we do that, we're going to see that we come back as Steve, because Steve is currently logged in. Last name, and we have all this information. So that query works. Find all users, and let's get FindOne. Okay. And let's test our query, FindOne. This should be FindOne. That's going to take an ID. All right, before we move on, let's fix this where it's instead of a string for FindOne, we need to use user. My service. You want to be careful here because now this is going to be referring to our JS, which is in our distributed folder. We don't want that. We want to get is our TS folders or US or TypeScript file. So just, you know, be on the lookout for that. So I'm going to go to FindOne. It's going to be taking in this type. Can return this. All right. So if we just refresh this, and if we go here, now we're going to have our type of ID, and then we want to get our first name. So this should be Tony Stark, and email should be im@avg. Oh, I got the wrong password. I got the wrong ID. Okay, so let me get Tony's ID, which is right here. So let me get over here, and okay, and so this is gonna get Tony's information. Perfect. And lastly, we just gotta test our updates. Okay, so we check out our docs. We have our, so we already checked current user, FindOne, find all. We tested our create user login, and we tested our remove user. Let's update our user input and user password. Okay, so let's do two mutations. So this is gonna be mutation update input, and this is gonna be a update user input, and this is gonna be a user type input. So the other thing we can change is first name. So I think the only thing I want to change for now for this example is here. I'm just gonna say tony@avg.io, and then let's just, I guess, first name, change this to Anthony. As I mentioned earlier in the video, we forgot to add the current user decorator. So if we try to run this right now, we'll get an error because we're not passing our execution context. So let's add it right now. For update password and our update user input. That was it. We just need, because that's the only way to capture from the header the ID and the email that we're placing via JSON Web Tokens. So now we change this, we're going to see updated information. And if we go to our find all, we'll see now the first name for Steve is Captain, and the email was changed from ca@avg to steve@avg. Okay, and I think all it is working. Let me see. I went over my update. Oh, and my update password mutation is the last thing we're missing. Let's create a new mutation, and let's say update password, and this is going to be of the type update user pass, and this is just going to say the current pass. So let's just say password and then the new pass, and let's just say password 1. Now, just to test it, I'm going to put another 2 here, and I'm just going to run what this works. This is going to return first name and let's just say password. So this is going to say cannot return null for non-nullable object. Meaning, well, we can throw in a better GraphQL error, because what this means is that this is not working. So we remove this, we're going to get our right response because we're using the right credentials. So for the update password, we should throw in a if user is false, then throw the new GraphQL error of sorry homie, passwords don't match. Okay, and so we see our, now we go to our login. Let's go to our login. And if we try to log in, say nah homie. So let's just add our 1 to it with our new password. And now let's check out at Steve at Avengers.io and password 1. And we're gonna get our right token. So we click on here, and then if we pass this little guy over here and get our current user, we're gonna see updated email, updated first name, all that good stuff. And we also have our updated password. So that was it. I'm gonna place this up on GitHub. Use this if you need to, have a quick starter template. And if you have any questions, let me know. Have fun with it, folks.